we at the deepest aspect of ourselves are the same. We are one. Hello and welcome back to the Christian Kabbalah channel. My name is Shimon Klinger. I'm so happy you're here. We have just begun to go through the Gospel of John verse by verse. And in the last video, we looked at how a mistranslation has skewed the original meaning of the text. We are currently going through the prologue of the Gospel of John, and the prologue is the first 18 verses, John 1 through 18. This introduction to the Gospel of John, these verses, introduce some very foundational spiritual concepts, and then the rest of the book is used to flesh out and understand these concepts by talking about the story of Jesus. And as we have already talked about in many of our other videos, the Gospel of John is a coded Kabbalistic text, which means that it holds within it Kabbalistic secrets. These Kabbalistic secrets are embedded in the stories of Jesus. So in the last video, we retranslated verses 1 through 3 to read this. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. It was in the beginning with God, and through it all things were made, and without it not one thing was made that has been made. So now let's look at what these verses mean. So the author of the Gospel of John chose to start this book with three very powerful words. These words are "in the beginning." And of course, Genesis, the Old Testament, the 5 books of the Torah, are also started with these words. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. That's what it is in Genesis. And here again, we see the author using these same 3 words, in the beginning, to start off the Gospel of John. And what we have to know is that this was done consciously. And the reason why it was done consciously is because the prologue, what follows, the first 18 verses, also tell us a creation story. In the same way that Genesis starts out with the creation story and uses the words "in the beginning" to do that, the author consciously used "in the beginning" in order to communicate to us that he was also talking about a creation story. And so, to understand the creation story that John 1 is talking about, we have to understand the creation story as told by Kabbalah. Now, don't get me wrong, this is going to sound different than it does in Genesis. However, we must understand that Kabbalah teaches that Genesis, as well as all of the Old Testament texts, are coded. And so therefore, what is written is not always what is actually meant. So when we decode the story of Genesis through Kabbalah, we're told a slightly different version of what really happened compared to what is in the Old Testament text. And this is the creation story according to Kabbalah. Kabbalah tells us that in the beginning there was God and God only. Now, according to Kabbalah, God is not a man, God is a force that contains within it nothing but the desire to share, to impart goodness, peace, and love. In God, there is no sense of wrath, there is no sense of any negativity, and God only wants to extend to us this goodness. However, in the beginning, because there was only God, God needed to create an original vessel in order to share his goodness with, because if there is only God, God is by definition a being of sharing, and there is no one to impart that goodness or that sharing. In a dramatic first act of creation, created an infinite vessel in order to receive all of the goodness that this force wanted to impart. And so that's what the first act of creation was. It was that God took an aspect of itself and somehow transmuted that into an infinite vessel that could receive the goodness of God. Now, this vessel was created to receive the vast beneficence, the vast goodness of the light, or God, and it did so gladly. Can you imagine? There was a perfect harmony that existed between God, this endless force of sharing, and the original vessel, which was this endless force of receiving. And anything that the vessel wanted, the light provided. And that was the very purpose of the vessel itself. And this existed like this, well, there was no time at that point, but forever, basically. This endless harmony between the light and that original vessel. Anything that the vessel wanted, immediately that was fulfilled by the light. However, because the original vessel was simply a transmuted or a changed version of what the light was, very deep within it, there existed within the vessel an aspect of God, because it was simply a transmuted version of the light. And deep within the vessel, a desire grew that the light ultimately could not fulfill. And that desire deep down within the vessel was a desire to impart as well. Because the vessel at its core was God, it found that its core desire was to be like the light and to impart as well. But in the scenario where there was only light that imparted and only vessel that received, because that was the only thing in creation, and yet the vessel also wanted to share in the same way that the light was sharing, this created a issue. And so when the vessel came to the light and said, "We want to share in the same way that you share," the light could not provide an easy solution, because there was only two main entities, the light and the vessel. So in a dramatic way, the vessel refused to accept the light, and as a result, in that refusal of the light, the Big Bang occurred, and this physical reality that we live in was created. And we must know that everything that exists within this physical reality, according to Kabbalah, certainly every human soul, as well as everything else that exists, is a part of what that original vessel was. All of the various different things that exist, according to Kabbalah, are simply different versions of the original vessel. And as I said, every human being that exists is simply a shard of what that original vessel is. And so with this in mind, let's return to John 1:1-3. John 1:1-3 reads this: "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. It was in the beginning with God. Through it all things were made, and without it not one thing was made that has been made." So when we have an understanding of the Kabbalistic view of what happened when this world was created, we can begin to understand these words in a different way. John 1:1 tells us that what follows is a creation story when it says, "in the beginning." And we have to know that the word, or logos, is talking about the original vessel, the vessel that contained within it everything within creation. And how do we know this? We know this from verse 1:3, where it says, through the original vessel, all things were made, and without it not one thing was made that has been made. So you can see, if we understand the word not as Jesus, but instead as the original vessel of creation, the vessel that received all of God's beauty, all of God's goodness, all of God's beneficence, we can see that everything that exists in this world is an extension of that particular vessel. And that's what John tells us. John tells us that the original vessel contained within it all of creation. That anything that has been made in this world has been made from that original vessel and is a part of that original vessel. And as we're told in John 1:2, that the original vessel not only was with God, but it also was God. And this aligns perfectly to the creation story as told by Kabbalah. So if John tells us that through the original vessel all things were made, and without the original vessel not one thing was made that has been made, we have to ask ourselves, well, what else exists of this original vessel. Because you see, our physical reality as we know it, as we are told by John, is a part of that original vessel. But it also includes so much more. Everything that we see and everything that we do not see are also a part of that original vessel. And if we look deeply at what John tells us, it also means that there is a complete unity within this world. That everything in this world, every human being and everything that is not human, every aspect of this creation is actually coming from the same thing. We, in essence, are one. We are created from the same fabric. We, at the deepest aspect of ourselves, are the same. We are one. This is not a crazy New Age idea. Instead, if we look simply at what John 1:1-3 tells us, this is a deeply Christian idea. Everything is one. And within that unity, so we are told, is God. Not only are we a creation, but deep within us is God itself. That we, at our very core, are God. And this is the importance of John 1:1-3. I hope you enjoyed this new understanding. We will be going again verse by verse through the Gospel of John and understanding it from the lens and perspective of Kabbalah. If you liked what you saw, please hit the like button, subscribe button, hit the notification button. It greatly helps. We're trying to bring this information to as many people as we possibly can. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Have an amazing day.